combinations and concoctions of iniquity never heard of a generation ago. And the putrefaction of the carcass of civilization, waiting for the buzzards of judgment, is not peculiar to Skid Row. It shows up in the top brackets of society. There are plenty of prodigals today who live among the swine, although they're garbed in purple and fine linen. Bishop Kilgo said, "There's no difference in reality between the idle rich and the idle poor, the crowds who loaf in gorgeous hotels and the crowds who tramp the land in rags, no difference, save the difference in the cost of their wardrobes and the price of their meals." The scriptures speak of gross darkness. Now, of course, in arithmetic, gross means 12 dozen, but I think about that hillbilly preacher who got it the other way around and said that this gross darkness is 144 times darker than ordinary darkness. Well, he was right just the same. Man lives in concentrated night, and even his nuclear flashlight can't pierce it. But in the second place, we not only live in the dark today, God's people do in a dark world, but we get used to it. I want to warn you about that, as I warned myself. There is a slow and subtle and sinister brainwashing process that is gradually desensitizing us to evil. And little by little, sin is made to appear less sinful until the light within us becomes darkness. And how great is that darkness? Our magazines are loaded with sordid crime. The news stands with corruption. We're engulfed in a tidal wave of pornographic filth. Television has put us in the dark more ways than one, with Sodom and Gomorrah in the living room, and we get used to it. We get acclimated to it. We accept it as a matter of course. It's language and it's art and it's literature and it's music. Lucille Ball said the other day, "I'm shocked because I'm not shocked." And Gloria Swanson, who was an actress in the days of the silent film, said, "Lately, the violence, the cruelty, the despair of American movies in recent years makes me mentally and emotionally sick." Now, if they can see it, and they live by it, looks like church members ought to wake up somewhere down the line. We learn to live without an inner protest. We are to hate evil. We're to abhor evil. We're to abstain from the very appearance of evil. But we get used to it. Lot, I never would have known he was a righteous man but for the New Testament, but he moved into Sodom and lived in it, and they put him on the city council, and I know that his righteous soul was vexed from day to day with their unlawful deeds, but he lost his influence with his family, had to flee for his life, died in disgrace. I've met a lot of Lots in the last few years, and my Lord said, as it was in the days of Lot, they tell us today that we ought to hobnob with Sodom and get chummy with Gomorrah in order to convert them. They tell us that the end justifies the means, and that's not so. People like that don't turn the light on in Sodom. They just get used to the dark. The end doesn't justify the means. If the means is wrong, you've spoiled the objective before you ever get to it. Let me illustrate this business of getting used to the dark. I heard of an Irishman who came over here and worked for a year, and then his wife came over to join him. And she said, "Don't these people talk funny over here?" He said, "You ought to have heard them when I came over a year ago." Now, they were still talking the same way, but he was getting used to it. In the third place, the worst of all this is we get to where we think it's getting brighter. Sit enough in a dark room and you'll imagine the light is breaking in, and men can dwell so long in darkness they fancy the day is dawning, and what some people call the birth pangs of a new age is just the dying gasps of this one. We're not seeing the scene getting brighter today. We're seeing people get used to the dark. They call it broad-mindedness. They call it tolerance. And what it is peaceful coexistence with evil, an effort to establish communion between light and darkness, to be a friend of the world and a friend of God simultaneously. This condition extends to the religious world and evangelical Christianity. It's possible to fraternize with unbelievers until false doctrine becomes less objectionable, and until we come to terms with it, and some would want to incorporate it into the fellowship of the faith. Some begin by opening the doors to borderline sects and cults who believe almost like we do. Still others want to make a crazy quilt out of all the world religions. They call it a syncretism. That's a big word. I call it hash. I never did eat hash away from home because I didn't know what it was made out of. Never did eat it at home because I did know what it was made out of. And we've got a lot of theological chefs today fixing up these mulligan stews of a general mixture of everything. It's a miserable situation. The Bible says, mark them which cause divisions among you. But Jesus said, I came to divide families, so what about that? Well, if He does it, it's all right, but if we do it, that's something else. The same danger exists in the world of doctrine and in conduct. You can live so long in the twilight zone and in conditions of low visibility until you find the practices of this world less repulsive. You think it's your mind broadening and it's just your conscience stretching. We renounce what we call the Phariseeism and the Puritanism back of another day, we say. And you remember Bunyan's Immortal Pilgrim's Progress. I don't think many people read it anymore, but they certainly ought to. You remember the Christians passing through Vanity Fair, and today we spend our vacations there. But then times have changed, you know, since that time. We prefer the borderline, the Beulah land, and young people even today. And let me say here that although I've been preaching for 68 years, I have a better response now from young people than I've ever had in all these years. I give them credit. Many of them come up after the sermon and make intelligent comments about it. But of course, when we get into question and answers, sometimes they make the same mistake that they've always made and that older folks make too. And I tell these young folks, the only difference between us is I've been young and old both, and you've just been young. And therefore, I can speak with a little leverage there. But they're always asking, what's wrong with this, and what's wrong with that, and what's wrong with the other thing. And I say, now hold everything. You're already off on the wrong foot. Why aren't you asking, how much like Jesus can I be, instead of asking, how much like the world can I be and still be a Christian? They'll do it every time, and so will some of you that are older and ought to know better. How close to the precipice can I walk without going over? When the Christians were at Vanity Fair, I read that as the folks at Vanity Fair wondered at their apparel, the clothes they wore, that would bring up another subject I haven't got time for tonight. So they did likewise at their speech. For few could understand what they said. They naturally spoke the language of Canaan, but they that kept the fair were men of this world, so that from one end of the fair to the other, they seemed barbarians to each other. Unfortunately, today, the worldly crowd, and to an awful extent, the church crowd, they don't look like barbarians to each other. They get along fine. They're agreeing. No difference there. And all of this sounds awfully out of date. Now, of course, it doesn't happen all of a sudden. The poet said, vice is a monster of such frightful mien as to be hated needs but to be seen, yet seen too oft, familiar with her face. We first endure, then pity, then embrace. That's the way it goes. Here's how it works. There was a time when sin shocked some of you people more than it does now. The other day, Billy Graham said, and I've lost the clipping. I've hunted in all directions for it. I'm so sorry I can't locate it. But he said that his friend Cancer preached a sermon on worldliness, and he said, I got under conviction. He said, I find myself looking at things on television now that I wouldn't have looked at 20 years ago. And he said, it bothers me. And somehow I'm not quoting him verbatim, that this is the sense of it. And it concerns me very much, because if we don't watch, we are going to gradually be lured and fooled by the spirit of this world until God withdraws his hand. And that's what Billy's afraid of, because he knows that if God withdrew his hand upon his ministry, why, it'll just fold up, because that's the secret of it. It's the secret of any ministry in the name of the Lord Jesus. And I appreciate his honesty about it, because I don't know many who would make that honesty confession. And I've been thinking a great deal about it since. The other day, a secular journal, this is not a religious journal, said the desensitization of 20th century man is more than a danger to the common safety. There are some things we have no right ever to get used to. One is brutality, and the other is the irrational, and both have now come together and are moving toward a dominant pattern. That's the way it is. There was a time when some of these things amazed you, and now they only amuse you. We laugh at the shady joke, and tragedy has become comedy. The preachers need to remember what Dr. Jowett said. We are tempted to leave our noontide lights behind us in our study to move among men with a dark lantern, which we can manipulate to suit the company. We pay the tribute of smiles to the low business standard. We pay the tribute of laughter to the fashionable jest, easy tolerance to ambiguous pleasures. We soften everything to a comfortable acquiescence. We seek to be all things to all men to please everybody. We run with the hare and hunt with the hounds. We become the victims of illicit compromise. There's nothing distinctive about our character. And he speaks of wearing gray when we mix with the businessmen of the congregation and talking gray in conversation with them. That's one reason why, if we don't watch it, we preachers of today are going to be different from the old-timers who are gone but not forgotten. We're going to be forgotten but not gone. That's going to be another story altogether. You see this everywhere. You see it in the housewife who moves into suburbia and wants to get along with the group spirit of the folks down the street. So she wants to find out their pattern of life and their lifestyle and their social habits. The organization man at the boss's party when the liquor's passed around, he wants to stand in with the management. So what? The student on a pagan campus, new techniques on how to socialize at Vanity Fair. But Bunyan's pilgrims had the right idea. We're not here to live in the dark. We're here to walk in the light. One of the signs of getting used to the dark is the way we excuse everything today. Pretty hard to find an old-fashioned sinner anymore. Adultery is just free love. The drunkard's just a respectable alcoholic. Sodomy is homosexuality elevated into good society now. The murderer is just temporarily insane. Got off to a bad start as a baby and pushed his oatmeal off of the table and grows up and pushes his wife off Brooklyn Bridge. just made that way. The murderer is temporarily insane. Communists are invited to lecture on our platforms. Parents are saying, what's the use of my trying to bring up my kids right all the way down the block? They don't know anything about that. We live with what I call trendism. I want you to think about it tonight and later on after I've finished. And Paul wrote to Timothy, he told him about 3 trends. The trend with regard to things. You know that familiar passage. Love of money is the root of all evil, and so on. Godliness plus contentment equals prosperity, and so on. But every time he mentions one of these trends, he says to Timothy, but you're not to do that. Each time, but thou comes somewhere down the line. But as for you, some of the translations have it. Then you get over into that long list of the perilous times. Same story, the menace, the peril of the times. And you know that about that crowd, heady, high-minded, lovers of pleasure and all the rest of it. But in verse 10, but thou, no, you're not to do this. Continue thou in the things which thou hast learned and hast been assured of, knowing of whom thou hast learned them. And then finally, the parallel concerning truth in chapter 4 of 2 Timothy. They shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned to fables, but not you. Watch thou in all things, endure afflictions, and so on. You see there, as in the first reading tonight, Paul gives us the trends. My beloved Christian friends tonight, I know who I'm talking to. I know this is a Bible conference crowd and that you've come from evangelical churches all over this part of the country. I've been coming up here for years and years and years into this part of the country. I know who I'm talking to, and some would say, well, what do you mean us? Why, we've been studying our Schofield Bible and going to these conferences and coming to Winona Lake and all the rest. We don't need any word on getting used to the dark. You got to prove it to me, any part of the country. Anyway, now the trouble about trendism is it may be all right now, but you've got to ask, where's it going, and where'll I go if I go with it? That is the great danger. There are a lot of things today that aren't bad, not now. But communion of light and darkness will follow. TV programs with 30 minutes of foolishness and then pay God a tip with a hymn at the finish. He's got the whole world in his hands to jazz tempo. Church used to go to the jungle. Now the jungle's come to the church. A mighty fortress is our God. And then the next thing's a beer commercial. And then there's Hollywood portraying the Bible. And I'd as soon listen to a gangster lecture on honesty as Hollywood portraying the Bible. Could stand a few more amens on that out there. I knew I had some backsliders in this crowd. Let me warn you as I warn myself. And when I point my finger at you, my thumb points at me, and I'm saying this to the preacher as well. The awful danger of this gradually yielding to the pressure of the times and the mood of the times. It comes in all kinds of ways. And I think of that dear evangelist who died down in South America at the hand of the savages, who went in his diary that he kept as a young fella, said, I went to my friend's house to watch television, and God reproved me with that verse, keep thou mine eyes from beholding vanity. That's a good one to hang in front of the set. Make a great big copy of that. Now there are good things on television. I can get the news, I can get some documented things. I set up 2 hours later the other night to watch the rise and fall of the Third Reich, documented. Never will forget it. Adolf Hitler in that period. But you have to watch it today. When the Lord's sheep turn a dirty gray, all black sheep feel more comfortable. There isn't anything that'll perk up an old sinner anymore in the error of his way than for you to start slipping. And we become thermometers, just registering the prevailing temperature when God meant for us to be thermostats and change the temperature. The salt loses its savor and we become neither nor in a world that's either or. Preachers become experts in the art of almost saying something. You get right up to it and then you make a little detour. Huh? Most folks don't know the difference anyhow, but you should. I think about that woman who said, you're a congressman. I sure do like your straightforward way of dodging the issue. Charles Wilson was in Eisenhower's cabinet, and he was from General Motors and didn't know anything about this fancy two-time business. He said, if I get another secretary, I want a one-armed man. He said, why? He said, I'm so tired of this. On the one hand, this, and on the other hand, that. My Bible tells me that the real crisis is in John 3:19. I wish you knew that as well as you know John 3:16. This is the crisis. That's the word in the original, spelled with a K. This is the test by which men are judged, that light has come into the world. Men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. Jesus said to the crowd in Capernaum, and remember that was his hometown. He said, Sodom and Gomorrah will fare better in the judgment than you dignified, nice Capernaumites, because they didn't have any light, and I came to you that it might be fulfilled that there has come a light. And you didn't listen to it and attend to its warning. The coming of Jesus Christ precipitated a crisis, and everybody in here tonight's on the spot. Jesus has come. I find myself many times put on the spot about giving in to this time. For instance, I like to watch tennis matches. I like to watch the tournaments, but some of the best ones are on Sunday afternoon, you know, and sometimes I get in a home where I was, not long ago, where World Series is going on, and the preacher was with us at the table, and he couldn't eat for running back in there to the TV every 2 or 3 seconds to see who was winning what. And I said, Lord, deliver me from that. I don't want to get that bad. But sometimes in a church, I meet with the choir, and then they come out giggling and laughing, and I say to myself, good Lord, here we go again. And then God says to me, how about you? How many times have you walked casually into the pulpit as though it were some ordinary job? You ought to go into it every time as though it were the first time, fresh, as though it might be the best time that you ever had, and as though it might be the last time. You give me a bunch of preachers today and a bunch of church members that go to the house of God on Sunday as though it were the first, fresh and new, and expecting it to be maybe the best time we ever had. You see, we pray for rain and don't take our umbrellas. We don't expect God to visit us. When have you gone to church and said, now, Lord, maybe this will be the morning? And we ought to go as though it might be the last. Become one of these mornings is going to be your last and mine. You wonder who will be next in this crowd to answer the call. Give me people like that, we'll turn the world upside down again, because that's the way it started. And this light shines in the Savior. I'm the light of the world. It shines in the Scriptures. The entrance of thy word giveth light. And it shines in you. If you're a Christian, you're the light of the world. One reason why some people don't come to church, they don't like to have the light turned on. I had a little country church years ago where a dear little lady who loved God would sit over here to my right, and her husband would bring her and sit in the car out in the dark, more ways than one, through the service, because he couldn't take it. He would wince and squirm and twist if he came in because he had photophobia, fear of the light. But it says that if you love the light, you'll take all of it you can get. That's the mark. Friend, do you love good preaching? Do you have it laid on the line? Do you want it said in words you can understand? The more you hear, the more of it you want to hear. My old daddy didn't get to hear many big preachers. He did given a lot to hear some of the great ones. But if he did get a chance to hear a pretty fair preacher, oh, how much it meant to him. Got hold of a book of sermons by Spurgeon, one of them on the text, who hath called us unto his eternal glory. He copied it off by hand. He had it in the book, but he wanted to get it in his heart. Preaching doesn't mean that much to a lot of people these days. You can turn on the knob anytime and get a sermon. So what? You ever walk across a field and turn over a large stone and all the creeping things under the rock begin hurrying and scurrying for cover? That's what happens to your sinful heart when the light breaks in. You can't tell what's down in the cellar, all the lizards and the snakes and the scorpions. You don't know what's down there till you turn on the light. You don't know what's in your heart either. I don't mean you have to be queer. Not talking about this brand that goes out into all kinds of directions and gets a little bit off and going around with a great big button saying, I'm a Christian, carrying a Bible as heavy as a Sears and Roebuck catalog. You don't have to do that. Just be one. The word will get around. Folks will catch on. The neighbors will catch on. The children will catch on. Folks will know it. Better light a candle than curse the darkness. You can't shovel darkness out of a room. There's only one way you can get it out. Turn on the light. That's the only way you can get light into any place. Turn it on. But Jesus said there were two things that would smother that light. A bushel and a bed. Put it under the bushel, put it under the bed, and it won't shine to the glory of God. The bushel stands for money making, business, the things of this world. That'll smother it. The bed stands for ease and worldly pleasure, laziness and carelessness. That'll do it. My brother who spoke here earlier about it, and I agree with him completely, when it says there in the days of Lot, it doesn't say they were drinking liquor and living in adultery and all the rest of it. It said they were eating and drinking and marrying and giving in marriage and buying and selling and planting and building. What's wrong with that? Not a thing in the world, unless it's all you do. And if God isn't in on it, it's worldliness. I grew up on the old-fashioned teaching that if you didn't dance and smoke and play cards and two or three other assorted evils, you weren't worldly, then you were all right. My soul, that never covers all the territory. There are plenty of people who don't even do those things today and say, I'll have you know that I don't do that anymore. Yes, but some of them can gossip all afternoon and ruin more reputations than you can put back in 6 months. Because the tongue's never been controlled. And it's a very treacherous and tricky thing today. I know a farmer raises hogs. That's all right. But that's all he does. He never gives God a thought. I'd hate to be kept out of heaven by hogs. Man in the lumber business walks through the woods. He never sees the beauty of those trees, just how much will that bring on the market. That's worldliness. You're taken up with the things of this world. And if that's all you live for, you may be a church member. But if the things of this age, you know, they're all good in their place, but if they're your life, you're as worldly as some young blade on a dance floor at 2 in the morning. I didn't expect any amens at all on that one. But friend, I warn you as I warn myself. And I wish you'd go out of here tonight, and before you try to sleep, ask yourself this question. In what way, if any, am I getting used to the dark? Husband and wife, say to each other, dear, had you thought about that much? Is there any way in which we are gradually being desensitized to evil? Oh, it's practically harmless now, yes, but the trickle will become a torrent after a while. I think it'd be a revival if everybody who needs to do that in this congregation would, before you rest, come before God and say, Lord, help me to stop this business at the start. Nip it in the bud. Nip it in the bud. Because I know some folks who've waited so long, they'll never nip it. Now it's got them. And so we're warned, the very appearance of evil.